Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an
Well, it's 6 o'clock. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on secure secrets management. I'm delighted to welcome secrets management guru Jake Hall from InfinityWorks, who will take us through the secure management of passwords, connection details, API tokens, and other application secrets. And then he will show us how Hashicorp Vault can help us manage these secrets better and more securely. There'll be a question and answer session afterwards, taking us up to the session close at 7 o'clock. Please use the chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen to ask the questions that occur to you as the talk progresses, and Jake will discuss as many of them as we can fit in after his presentation. So if I can hand over the screen to Jake, welcome, and please start.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be chatting to you all today. Let's just get the screen shared and then we can get ourselves kicked off. So hopefully we're straight into sharing my screen. So today I wanted to talk to you about how secrets are hard to manage. And normally when we're in a room full of people, I would start by doing some show of hands about some of these horror stories that I've seen as I move around different clients and different projects, in terms of how secrets are being mismanaged or misplaced. And so just have a think about who can relate to each of these and whether you've seen these different things, or maybe you've seen them in your current organization right now. So first up is plain text passwords and configuration files. So I'm thinking about plain text usernames or passwords embedded in scripts or configuration files, maybe on a server or in a Docker container or something like that. Maybe we've seen those somewhere. I've seen this in a lot of places. How about API keys committed to Git by accident? Oh no, this happens all the time in lots of different organizations, and people sometimes just do a commit over the top and hope that it's gone away. I'm afraid it's still in the history. We need to go and clear that out a bit better. There's lots of tools that we can use to get rid of that, like Trufflehog and things, to make sure our history is nice and clean. How about IP whitelisting as trust between servers? So I'm talking about IP whitelisting or using host names to trust a server connection between one server and another server, or maybe a third-party system that trusts your connection, or you trust them based on a simple IP whitelist and no other authentication. It's also not great, right? How about a lack of willing to change or roll any access controls or secrets in case something breaks? We don't want to change that database password because we've no idea who in the business is using it or what systems are using it. So we might break all sorts of things. So let's just leave it alone. And yes, we know that Mark has now left the business, but it's not worth the risk of breaking something. So let's just leave that password alone. Let's just leave it. I've seen this a lot across lots of different businesses where passwords are years and years old, and lots of people have had access to it and have never actually rolled that password. And finally, my absolute favorite is a Vault root token stored in a Confluence wiki page. So Vault being Hashicorp Vault in this instance, and the root token is the master password for accessing Vault, being able to do whatever you want with those credentials and be able to unlock that vault and be able to get a super administrator access, was just stored in a simple wiki page that was protected to a couple of people. Talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. It's rather scary. And this actually, I've seen this happen on a project a few projects ago for me. Obviously, we fixed this fairly rapidly once we noticed. So who am I? Hi, my name is Jake Hall. I'm a principal consultant at InfinityWorks. I originally started out life as a software engineer. I dabbled in sysadmin and maybe a bit of DBA on the side, and then sort of progressed through my career in terms of leading teams and became more of a leader of leaders. And now I focus largely on cloud native projects. I'm really interested in agile and DevOps cultures and how to develop those in small and new budding organizations, And also I love skiing, so I thought I'd share that with you. And this is me in the Alps in January or February this year. So I'm hoping to get back out to the Alps again in February time, and enjoy some snow rather than baking to death in a London flat right now, where there's no air conditioning and it's very, very warm outside. So let's make sure we're all on the same page with what are secrets. What am I even talking about? John did an excellent introduction and sort of spoiled a little bit my thunder with this one, but not to worry. So secrets are application passwords and API keys, SSH keys. They could be database credentials. They could be private certificates. If you've got a TLS connection, you need the private part of that certificate. It could be an AWS key, to be able to access those command line interfaces. It could be a root credential to a system, like we were talking about with Vault earlier. But it could be something like an MFA backup code. That's also a secret. We need to keep those safe so we don't accidentally give up access to our things like GitHub accounts or emails and that kind of stuff. So it's anything that's sensitive, that if an attacker or third party gets access, they can do things they shouldn't be doing. And secrets are critical to the control of our systems, and we need to make sure that they're safe and not accessed by people or actors that shouldn't have them. So what happens if we don't manage our secrets, if we just use them and put them into our applications? Well, we end up with a situation called secret sprawl, and that's where developers or sysadmins or whoever start just adding more and more secrets into different applications and workflows, that over time, slowly, bit by bit, we will end up with more and more secrets spread out all over our infrastructure and platform and estate. And we start to get into a place where we don't know what we don't know anymore. We've no idea what secrets are where. We don't know what happens if we change something like a database password. I mentioned this earlier in the sort of horror stories. It's actually a violation of the 12-factor app methodology of thinking about things, where config should be stored in the environment rather than with the code. And for me, secrets are actually a subset of config. It's just something we want to keep sensitive and secure, rather than config is a bit more accessible in plain text. But also with the secret sprawl, we then end up with a problem of we struggle with access control as well. That if we've got secrets spread out all over our estate, in terms of, it could be on all sorts of different servers or infrastructure, they're all over the place. We can't easily control who, whether that's a machine or a human, has access to any given secret. We also then don't know who accessed what, when. So we don't have that timeline of understanding around what machine accessed this database credential at any given point in time. We also don't have an understanding about what time or a human accessed a API key. We have no auditability. And so when we have, for example, plain text secrets stored in a config file on a server somewhere, and that's how the application gets its secrets, we can't easily control who has access to those secrets if they're in the plane. If someone has access to that server, they've got access to all the secrets on that system. It can also make it a lot easier for an attacker or a bad actor in an organization, if you have all your secrets in the plane, to then move around all those different systems and be able to then access all of those different systems, in terms of, they've now got access to a database they didn't have access to before. They might have access to this third-party API that they can then do all sorts of interesting things that they've now got a new attack vector to explore. And then finally, we've got secret leak. So we need to think about what happens when we need to roll that password, like what happens when a secret ends up on the internet, God forbid, and what happens if that ends up in a Git repo or what have you. Or what happens for our leavers process? What happens when somebody unfortunately leaves our organization and chooses to go somewhere else? We need to then think about redeploying the whole application potentially from source, if it's in the code, and then update all the possible locations it's in. But we also then need to think about where that secret originated from and how many other services or humans share that same secret, and then have to update all of those in turn. So all of those then lead us to, well, maybe we need to think about managing this. And how do we leverage secret management to get it under control? Now, I'm not talking about management in terms of a CTO here, so don't worry, the CTOs, I'm not asking you to start looking after all the secrets. I'm talking about more of an automated way of secret management, and how do we use a tool in order to manage secrets and look after them. And it comes down to a couple of different key things that we need to think about in order to look after them. So first, we want to catalog our secrets. So we do this for observability, and without it, we don't know what secrets we have or what services use what secrets. And that we don't then also know what happens if we change something. So with a catalog, we'll know if we change this certain secret for a specific database, we know all of the different services that require an update in order to function properly. We then also want our system to be able to audit properly. So as part of auditing, we will get some nice logs out of that, hopefully. And with that, we'll be able to see exactly who accessed what and when, and also what they changed potentially. So we actually, with our audit system and our centralized logging and auditing of secrets, we use Hashicorp Vault, and I'll come to a demo in that shortly. But this was actually super useful with this auditing capability. We had a production incident where one of our third-party API calls just started failing out of the blue, but no code change had happened. And what had happened is that somebody, we'd identified that basically the API key had changed. With the third party, were telling us when the API key had been rolled. It told us that it basically hadn't been rolled, the one that we were supposedly using. And when we then looked in Vault, we could see that the API key had then changed. So a quick look down the audit log told us that Bob, in this case, Bob's name has been changed to protect his identity, but Bob had changed the credential, and it was a legitimate change. He'd been asked to do that by a ticket in the queue, and he'd done that properly and followed the instructions. And we could easily then roll that back, but it was easy for us to then go, why do we need this change? Can we roll it back quickly? Yeah, no problem here, it's done. Rather than us just sort of running around trying to work out where this secret had gone. So having that audit allowed us just to go and ask Bob, like, hey, can we roll this back? We're not sure that this is working properly, rather than being stuck for a little bit longer. And it makes that debugging experience a lot easier. But also, moving on to sort of access controls, it makes it a lot easier to restrict what people or machines have access to what secrets. So when we've got plain text secrets on a server, we can only guess who has access to that secret. And developers are very good at copying secrets from system access, because, well, I need production access to this database, I'll just copy the one that the service uses. And we've all been guilty of this, I'm sure, at some point in our careers. I know I'm guilty of it very recently, up until we rolled out dynamic credentials, which I'll come to later. Basically just logging into our secret management system and then just grabbing the credentials and saying I need access to production, and then accessing the database through that way, because we know it will work. And then you've got that credential then scattered across lots of developer machines, and it's impossible to know who's got access and who's accessing what from where. So having really strong access controls within the centralized tool really allows us to start to limit access to the people in terms of human beings, and also machines. They can only access what they actually need to access. And then finally, we've got rolling credentials. So rolling credentials is the ability to change a password or an API key either automatically or on a periodic basis in order to be able to solve some of the problems we've already discussed around people leaving the organization, or people being able, a secret leak or things like that. It's also just good security practice to try and roll credentials on a regular basis, just the same way that I know NIST is now recommending against this for personal access credentials in terms of your password to log into your email. NIST now says that rolling passwords for individuals is not a good idea. But for systems, when we can do it in an automated way and that no humans access it, it's actually a really good way of knowing that only systems that we know should have access have got the access that they're allowed. So those are the sort of key areas that we need to focus on with a centralized secret management system. But I think it's worth pointing out that for all of those people and those of us that are using microservices, they actually massively increase the complexity of dealing with secrets. This might be a slightly controversial point, but microservices aren't always an easy breeze. There are downsides to using microservices. They're easy, they make life a lot better in certain areas, but in certain, and especially in secrets, they make life a lot harder. We then have an explosion of databases. If we're following this strict microservice pattern of one database per microservice, we've now got databases all over our estate. Services might have different third parties. We've now got different third-party connections all over the place from different microservices. It's a lot easier to deal with in a monolithic system where all the secrets are in one place and we can manage those really easily. Whereas microservices now, we've got 50 to 100 microservices or what have you. How do we then deal with all those secrets in all of those different silos? So let's assume that we've identified the problem in an organization. One of the things that's causing you pain most out of all of those things, and that we've also found a tool to solve for that. I'll discuss tools shortly. But how do we get the sprawl under control? What are the sort of high-level steps in order to get our secrets managed properly? Now, our problem might be that when our employees leave the company, we don't rotate the secrets, and they have never been rotated. But actually, we want to start to rotate them. As a CISO, I want secrets to be rotated within 24 hours of somebody leaving our organization to make sure that they've no longer got any passwords that are valid. It might be that it's tricky to deploy. So if we want to change a secret that's the same secret across 7 load balance servers, we want to be able to deploy that and roll that out without any disruption to those 7 load balance servers. There might be a pain point in your organization that you're already thinking of, like, oh yeah, that actually we've got some pain there. So how do we get from where we are at the moment with our secrets spread all over the place to a place where we've got auditing and access controls? We know who did what when. All the secrets are nicely cataloged. Well, first we need to find all our secrets for a given service. So this is going to require taking a look at the code and figuring out everything it needs to run from a secrets perspective. So that will be require documenting all the third-party connections, any external connections, databases, internal tools, anything like that requires anything that's sensitive data. And sensitive data might be different for different organizations, but it's anything that we mentioned earlier in terms of API keys, passwords, private keys, anything like that. And then we want to copy them all into our centralized solution. So we've already got our tool and we've already set it up. It sounds like we're making the problem worse, right? But don't worry, we'll remove them from where they are currently stored right now, and we'll make it better. And the reason we duplicate them in the first place is in order to sort of follow the DevOps cultural mentalities of this, is that we want to be able to roll this out really quickly into production and without having to impact any other teams. So if we have them in both places, we're then doing rather than a big bang migration, a single event migration, we can then make sure that we're ensuring that those secrets are in both places. We can then slowly migrate from one to the other in production in terms of we can test them in our lower environments, our dev or pre-prod staging environments. And then we can then have our QA teams or our engineering products platform teams test that those services perform as they're expected to, they connect to the correct databases, etc. And then we can roll it out to production very, very quickly, knowing that we've tested it in the lower environments, still with both secrets in both places, but instead of pointing at the old secret, they're now pointing at the new one. And then we can then do another release to get rid of the old secrets from the old old location. And that really allows us to move really quickly in terms of that phased migration, that parallel running, as it were. So obviously we need to integrate our centralized tool with the service. So this is the fun part really for any engineers, is to actually try and integrate our whatever service, it might be Java, Golang, Ruby, Node, what have you, with the centralized tool, which is managing all of our secrets. So it will require some authentication, it will require some like handshaking probably, and then it will require a request to go and say, I want these secrets in order to be able to access my database, please. Now, the way I recommend that that you start this journey is that pick one of each different type of service that you've got. So it might be that you have a type of service that processes information and doesn't have a REST client or a gRPC client on it. But take one of those, take a REST one, take a gRPC one, take any different type of service that you've got and any different language and any different deployment methods, and pick one of each of those to prove out this methodology. Because what we want to ensure is that integration is going to work properly. We want to also ensure that any different languages we've got as well. So if we've got a couple services in Node.js, a couple services in Golang, that it's going to play nicely with the centralized tool in the way we expect. It's very frustrating to get all the way through deploying to one language and then find out that it's just a complete deal breaker with your other language, and it's going to be really tricky to do it in the way you've proposed. So start up front with one of each different language and type of deployment, etc., and that will really help to cement your confidence in being able to roll this out. And then validate it, run it in production, get it running straight away as soon as possible. With one or two services, get confident that it works, and as soon as you can get it to prod and prove it, delivering that small change, you can prove or disprove the hypothesis of whether this is going to work for you and your organization or you and your team, and that will then give you the confidence to then carry on with the rest of the project to move it or to change direction. It might be to do something slightly differently, or maybe the tool isn't right for the way you want to organize yourselves. And then finally, gone the wrong way. Finally, it's about knowing your pain points. So it's about thinking about doing the hard thing first. Don't shy away from the hardest thing that you think is going to be. Do that up front, because it might be that hard thing is actually very, very difficult and it's not worth the effort in terms of the tool you've picked, and you have to then go and reassess how you want to do it. Or it might be that hard thing isn't the hardest thing you thought it was, and you now learned something, and something else now reveals itself to be the hard one. So for example, Jeff, who wrote that one service in that one different language, so your entire stack is in Java and he wrote it in Golang, and that's going to be the nightmare, because every time you try and do anything to that service, it's always a complete pain. Well, start with that, figure it out with that one, figure it out with one Java service, and then roll that out. All right, so let's take a quick dive into tools. This is going to stay fairly high level, because I'm going to give you a demo of Hashicorp Vault, which is my favorite. And I can't say I've got a huge amount of experience with the other tools, but I wanted to be like the BBC and say that other tools are available. So we've got Hashicorp Vault, which is for me by far the best of the bunch in terms of how they work. We've got, but there are others available, as I said. So AWS Secrets Manager is a managed secrets tool, which allows you to put in and get secrets out, much the same way as Vault from the basic perspective. But you also don't have to run Vault yourself in order to use Secrets Manager. You can just use it straight off the shelf if you're already in AWS. Very similarly with Azure, you've got Key Vault, which allows you to do something very, very similar to Secrets Manager. Secrets Manager is a little bit more developed in terms of features, and it allows you to do a bit more integration with directly with different services like RDS for relational database services, etc. GCP is by far the worst of the cloud providers in terms of secrets management. The last time I checked, that GCP didn't actually provide any built-in managed secrets tool. They only provided this open source tool called Burgerless, which allows you to basically encrypt a file and store it in their blob storage, which to me sounds like a hack rather than actual proper secret storage. So your mileage may vary, and it's entirely up to you which tool, and there are other tools available. I just picked what some of the cloud ones and some of the most popular in terms of Vault as well. And then I briefly wanted to touch on sort of the different ways that you can roll and change passwords on the fly, because I'm going to do a demo on dynamic passwords. So it's important to understand what's the difference between rolling. I've mentioned that word a few times, and I've sort of dropped in dynamic a few times too. So it's a subtle difference, but for me, it's actually quite important. Rolling a password is that you have the same username generally, and the password changes on a fixed basis. So that might be 30 days, 90 days, etc. And you're just every so often just changing the password. You change the password, you change the password, and the service needs to cope with that in terms of the password changing and getting kicked out of that service. In terms of getting kicked out of that database. Rolling still means it's still easy for humans to steal that service level access, because the username and password is still stored somewhere that's accessible to humans. Dynamic is slightly different, that you get a brand new username and password every time. So when you request access to a database in our example of what I'm going to demo, you get a brand new username and password, and that's only specifically for you, and you get a time limit as well. You get what's called a lease. And that means that you can't steal a service level access, because there isn't service level access to steal. It's all in memory, only the service can get that, and it's all very closely controlled with access. So I much prefer dynamic secrets management over rolling, but if rolling is what your tool provides, then absolutely go for it. Make sure you enable it and roll with it. Sorry for the pun, I didn't intend that. Yeah, so roll with that, and make sure that you do at least one of these two, because they're super important, super valuable. All right, so I've done enough talking about the theory and the theatrics of how it works. Let's do a demo. So let's hope that my prayers to the sort of demo gods, etc., have gone well, and we'll see how this goes. I did test it earlier, so let's hope that everything goes quite well. Feel free to drop me a message in the chat if you can't see it too well. Don't worry too much. All of this is open sourced in GitHub. I'll share the link to this later on screen, and also we'll email it out as well. John's very kindly offered to do so. So if you can't quite see some of the commands that I'm talking about, it's all here documented in terms of this Git README, and you can follow along at home. And there's also a video as well if you want to follow along with a live video. All right, without much further ado, let's get this out of the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a Vault server locally. We're then going to also start up a Postgres database ourselves. We're going to authenticate to that Postgres database to check it works. And then we're going to then tell Vault, and we're going to set up Vault in a way that allows us to do dynamic credentials. And then I'll demonstrate how all that works. We'll test that it works when we reset the password, etc. And then we'll wrap up and we'll have some time for questions. Feel free to drop some questions in throughout the rest of this, and we can get to them at the end. I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions you've got. So please feel free to go for it. I'm not scared of answering tricky questions. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to set up our Vault server. So Vault, Hashicorp Vault is a tool that is super versatile, and it comes pre-built in with a development version of the server. So we can do this command, which is telling I've got Vault installed locally as a binary, and it basically says, Vault, can you run a server please, and you run it in dev mode. Now, it's worth me prefacing all this with all of the things I'm about to do are not production ready. Please do not run this in production. I take no responsibility for you, any of these commands being run in production, and also Vault doesn't either. They say this is very much a dev mode. Please don't use this in production. This can be productionized fairly easily, and I'll nudge to some of the places this can be productionized. So it makes it hopefully fairly easy for you to take yourself on this journey if you want to try it out. Okay, so we've got our root token. We'll need that later. We'll come back to that. So we've now got Vault running. We've now got our centralized secrets management tool. Perfect. We now need a database. So what I've got locally is I've got a Docker compose file, which just gives us really simply a Postgres database running on a port. And the password is super secret. Please don't steal any data from this database. Now I've shown you my password. Hopefully you can't get to it anyway, given I'm on a private IP. But you never know. So we've got admin and super secret as our username and password, and we're creating a users database to get ourselves started. So I'm going to create that up here. I also find it very difficult to tap and talk at the same time, so I apologize in advance. So now we've got our Postgres instance, in a Docker container running over here. We've got our Vault running over here. I'll just keep those on the screen at all times so you can see the logs going past if there's anything interesting happening. There will probably be something interesting in the Postgres one, but I'll point that out later. Right, so next thing actually we want to do is let's get some data into the database so we can play around with it and check that some of the authentication pieces we're doing in a bit actually work properly, and we can make sure that the database is legit and real and working. So let's just quickly run. So I've also got a SQL file locally that just blats a load of, I think there's 10,000 randomly generated users. Don't worry, I don't think any of these people actually exist. It's just all a big random generated SQL file. Again, all this is in the Git repo if you want to follow along at home later. Feel free to spin it up now and you can see what's going on. But yeah, so basically I've just inserted some random data using the PSQL command. So let's connect to that database. So I've got my favorite UI-based Postgres access here. It's called Postico. It's one of my favorites. I'm going to connect to localhost. So this is pre-set up for me to connect with my admin and my super secret password, and boom, we're in. So I've got my users table here, and we can see straight away we've got our 1,000 records that I would expect to see ready to go. Hopefully, I'll try and remember to try and make the text bigger when I hover over something that's fairly small. And what I'm going to do is on row 7, this guy's name, I'm going to go with it. This is this Holbury. I'm going to change that to my last name so we can prove that. I'm going to save changes, and now this last name is Hall. So we've proven that I, as a root user, have read access to this database. Excellent. Let's bin off that connection. And we've got back to the sort of favorite screen of Postico. So what we need to do now is, I'm just going to demonstrate how you read and write secrets into Vault super quickly, and how that works. And this is just a way that you can, if you've got static credentials to use, you can easily put things in there and just get them back from your application. So I'm just going to set up my local Vault client to be able to understand how to talk to the Vault server I've set up, which is the one over here in this terminal. And then I'm going to use the Vault KV command, which basically it's a key value store that I'm going to use now. And I'm going to then put it into a well-known location in Vault. So the well-known location is this secret. So the secret is a backend that Vault knows about. And then I'm going to, all the rest of this then is a name that I can make up. But I like to use a specific naming convention on all of my projects because it makes it easy to know what project is doing what and what account is doing, so what service is doing what and what environment we're in. So here we've got, for example, we know it's an application. We know that it's the user service because we've got a users database, and we know we're in our development environment. Potentially I could put local here, but I'm going with dev just to make it feel a bit more real. So I'm going to create that, and now we can see that Vault has told us that it's created something, it's given us version 1, it's happy, it's done its thing. So let's get that back out. I want to make sure that I've done that correctly. We can do vault kv get, and then I basically can just put in, rather than watch me painfully type slowly while trying to talk, I'll just copy and paste that for speed. We can see the username and password, admin and super secret. But for those of us that I love a terminal, but sometimes I do like to go and look at a UI. So let's go and look at the fancy UI that Vault also provides. So, ta-da! Vault gives us this really fancy UI that's built into the Vault server. So this is now loaded onto the Vault server, and it's asking us for some authentication. So I can go and grab that. It's worth saying that the Vault client locally is authenticated automatically because it's local and it's an unsealed, unauthenticated one, whereas the Vault UI does always need authentication because it doesn't quite work like that. So what I just did then is I just copied this root token. This is the super admin access to Vault, and now I'm in. So I can now see what's going on in here. So here's the secret backend that I was talking about. We can go in here, we can see our app user service dev, and now we can see our password super secret and our username admin. And this just gives us a really quick demonstration of the Vault UI and its capabilities, and how we can leverage that to make it easier for maybe potentially a bit more non-technical users who not necessarily particularly au fait with a command line, can come in and update secrets if necessary to be able to access this. It's also a lot easier when you're dealing with some bit more complicated, like maybe base64 encoded strings, or strings that have got new lines in, to deal with it in the UI rather than fighting with it in the command line. So that's how to do a very basic put and get with the Vault key value command. But that's not particularly interesting, right? Like we've seen a key value store before. How do we do something more interesting in terms of the dynamic secrets that I've been sort of promising of how to do? So let's move on to that. So first of all, what we need to do is enable a special backend in Vault, and this basically enables a system, an engine within Vault that says that it understands how to deal with databases. And if we went into the UI now, it'd show us a database bit, and it would understand that how to deal with databases. And then next up, we need to tell Vault how to connect to our database. So we need to understand how does it authenticate to our database. And I've just copied this in here just for speed, so we can move on. And so we've got our plugin name here. So because we're using Postgres, we're telling Vault how it's going to authenticate to Postgres databases. This is one of the reasons why it's not fit for production, is we're allowing anybody in Vault to be allowed to access this database. This should be more restricted in a production setting. We then give it the connection URL of how to authenticate in terms of where the database is and what the username and password, where that goes. Again, another reason why it's not production ready. We wouldn't necessarily want to disable SSL in a production system. We'd probably want to validate that properly. And then we've also got our admin and super secret here specified. And Vault will then store that internally itself as part of a secret, and then we will never be able to get that back out again. So once we put this in, no human will be able to pull out that super secret password. It's a write-only mechanism. We can change that if we need to, but there's a nifty feature in Vault that allows us to do that a bit differently. So Vault now understands where our database is and how to connect to it, but we can't do anything with this yet. One of the next things we need to do is to tell Vault how we want to be able to access our database, what permissions it should grant. And these are called roles. So we write to a special location in Vault a role. So I'm just going to paste that in. Again, this is another complicated command that Vault needs. I'll talk you through it. So what we've got here is we're writing now to the database roles section, and this is a name that we can make up. So I've called this the read-only users database human role. So I broke this down into the read-only. So this role will only allow me to read from this database and not do anything else. I won't be able to write to it. And I've called it the user. The role's got the user's database name in it, so I know specifically what database it's for. And also this role specifically for humans. So this isn't a system service role or for a machine. This is specifically for human beings to access this database with this level of privilege. It's quite a nice naming convention to understand really immediately what this role is allowed to do. We're then linking our database name here to, so the role, it's a one-to-many relationship. A role can be linked to one database, and the database can be linked to many roles. So we're linking, you see here, the database name is a user's database, and we've got user's database up here. And then we get to be a bit creative with our creation statements. So this is any valid SQL we can run here. We can write basically whatever we want. The only thing that's sensible to write in Postgres terms is to create a role and grant permissions. So we're creating our role. In normal terms, this would be like creating a user effectively in a database. Postgres calls them roles just to make it difficult, but we are where we are. And then we grant some permissions to that role or that user in Postgres. So we're just saying we're only allowing select all tables in schema public to the name is something that is automatically filled in by Vault. The password is automatically filled in by Vault, and so is the expiration. So this is all just a templated string. And then finally, we're down to sort of the TTL section, so the time to live. And these time to lives, basically, we can set these to whatever we'd like. But in this system, I've set this to, we're only allowed to access the database or this credential for an hour maximum initially, and then we can renew it. And then totally, we're only allowed to access this database for 10 hours, which for a human accessing a database is probably really sensible for a 10-hour access, because that's probably normally a rough work day, given a bit of overlap potentially for, issues, production incidents, all that kind of jazz, a lunchtime and a couple of breaks, whatever. I wouldn't condone, necessarily a 10-hour work day normally, but, I like to give a bit of leeway so people aren't having to authenticate multiple times during the day. So it's a nice balance. So 1 hour is how long a user would get to access the database up front. So now we need to be able to access that. Let's test it. Let's make sure we can access this database. So let's do Vault read, and then let's use this role name that we just created. And that's, I need to change roles to creds, and then we can get, so we just read what we wrote, and then I can change this to creds. And then I should get some credentials. So we can see here, I've got a lease for an hour and a username and password. And you can see these are completely randomly generated. So let's connect. So here's my test from earlier that worked. And then here's my new connection credentials now, and we're in. So that has what Vault's done there is it's connected to this database locally. It's then automatically created that user with those permissions. It's then given us that username and password back that it generated for us, and it's then given us those credentials for us to be able to connect to ourselves. So you can see here I've set up a filter just to filter for my last name. Lots of these have got Hall in at some point, but let's just change this to my first name so we can see the read only in action. So I've just changed that to Jake. And it says down the bottom, I've edited one row and I'm going to save changes. And if I try and do that, it says permission denied for table users. The changes were reverted. I don't have permission to do that with this current user because I only have read-only access. And if I go into the Postgres PG catalog, one of the other things I can see is a valid until. And given that I'm currently working in UTC +1, this is actually in an hour. So that lease is correct as well. That's in 1 hour's time in 1843 UTC or 1943 UTC +1 for me, given it's London time, that my credential will automatically be removed. And I can renew that as well. So I can say, actually, Vault, I would like to renew my lease, and I can grab my lease ID. I can get some more time with that credential. And if I go back here, we can see that it was 1843 If I refresh, it's now 18:45. So it's pushed that another few minutes on. So you can see the lease renewing as well. Now, finally, one of my favorite features, and then we'll wrap up and we'll have some time for questions, is the ability for Vault to change the password of the database that it uses. So, you know, how we connected to localhost earlier with our super secret password, and that's obviously not very secure. What we can actually do with Vault is to say, please go and change that password. So we don't know it anymore. And it will then go off to that database and update that password and update its own record of that password. So I'm just doing that with a quick Vault write. I have to force it because it's a potentially damaging command. So Vault wants a double confirmation. I'm playing fast and loose with the rules at the moment, just in terms of time. And I'm going to tell it to rotate root on the user's database. If I do that, our database password has now been changed, and you can see a bunch of stuff up here that's been sorted. And if I now go and try and connect to our localhost connection that I did earlier, we now get a password authentication failed for user admin because the password I'm using, super secret, is now no longer the real password. Vault has changed that, and I can no longer ever get that password back, which will probably be very frustrating for certain individuals in an organization that you've now locked them out of their database. But that's just the way things are. But I really like that feature in terms of being able to remove, any human access to a production database is in terms of root is really appealing. So you know that you've got ultimate control over that database from Vault's perspective. All right, quick wrap up, and then we'll I'll answer some questions if anyone's got any for me. Please feel free to drop them in the go-to control panel. So if you centralize your secrets, you'll massively reap the benefits. We've rolled this out on most of the projects that I've done. It massively helps with a secret sprawl, just bringing them all into one place. Hopefully, I've demonstrated tonight that there are tools that significantly help with that journey. Hashicorp Vault is my favorite, but please pick the tool that suits you and your organization. And start small. Don't feel that you have to boil the ocean, changing all your secrets all at one go. And start with that pain point. Figure out what your pain point is with secrets and address that, and start to move towards a better place. So with that, I will thank you. I'm at Florx on Twitter, and here's the link to the GitHub repo. So I'll hand over to John to start peppering me with questions, and then I can start to see what you've got for me.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you. That was a wonderful, wonderful tour of Hashicorp Vault. Now, to the audience, please do submit questions onto the chat box, and I can field them for Jake. Jake, so far you've touched on this, in fact, but what was it about Hashicorp Vault that made you pick it as against those other competitor tools that do the same sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it's the right level of maintainability and also different capabilities in terms of the different features it offers, and it's always been upgraded and new features have been added all the time. So from my perspective, Vault's got a bit of a stigma attached to it in terms of it's really hard to run. We haven't found that in the organizations where I've run it. So I'd actually encourage you to give it a try and actually really think about whether you need to run it in a high availability mode at all. Think about whether you could do it with an S3 backend and that kind of stuff. I know that quite publicly, Monzo Bank have said that Vault is really great for them, and they've had a lot of success with it. But for me, coming back to the dynamic secrets is a real game changer for how we manage and organize access control and audit within the client that I work with. And given it's a financial institution with regulated products, it's really great to have that, to be able to drive forward those really locked down databases, but actually still being quite accessible from a developer's point of view. We can still give read-only access to developers to be able to debug problems, whereas some of those other tools don't quite give you all of those kind of functionalities, whereas we've got a lot of ability to be able to mix it up and change it and whatnot, and it's open source as well. So that's always a great plus for me, is being able to, contribute back to an open source community, in terms of being able to put PRs in and that kind of stuff. I know a couple of other team have, contributed improvements back to different backends in terms of plugins and stuff. So yeah, it's always great.
There's a subsidiary question from one of our audience. Is it completely open source?
So it's a tricky one to answer, right? So technically, I think it's copyrightable in certain areas, but so there's an enterprise product, and it's one of those kind of tools that is it's open source, and you can use it however you like, and you can build it from source if you choose. But there's also some enterprise features that if you want to use, like multi-factor authentication, for example, you then have to pay for. And the support licenses are very spicy. Like, depending on your size of organization, they're quite pricey. So but you can use all of the features that I said today are all completely free. As you just saw, I just ran the local Vault open source thing. We're running that in production right now for my client without paying a single penny to Hashicorp. So yeah, the vast majority of the product is completely free, and you can do what you want with it.
Mike observes in a term I haven't heard before, it's a freemium system, as in premium with free on the beginning.
Yeah, it's a fairly classic approach, right? You can use it up until a point, and then you start to then outgrow it, and then they're like, yeah, if you would like to pay for that feature, we would happily give it to you. And that's with the high availability pieces and the MFA and more enterprise level features.
An approach brilliantly pioneered in a different context, but one with which we are very familiar by LinkedIn. A different question that you've touched on towards the end of your talk. We've been asked, have you implemented this in an organization yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So where I am on client right now, the second, every single one of our production databases and data stores uses dynamic credentials to be able to, for any systems, any machines or any humans to access those databases. So we have roughly 12 Postgres databases and I think like 15 MongoDB collections, all of which are accessed via dynamic secrets. And every single one of our other static secrets that we would prefer to be dynamic, but we've got no choice because third parties, they are all entirely stored within Vault. And that's our single source of truth for secrets. And it actually has then become also our single authentication mechanism for things like AWS. So there is no static secrets for accessing our cloud providers either. So normally people would get static secrets like AWS secret key and access key that they just put on their desktop somewhere and it stays forever. Ours are all dynamic too. So you only get them for 8 hours and then they expire and you have to get a new one tomorrow. It makes our leavers process in terms of people leaving the organization and moving around the organization super easy, because they lose access to the database the moment that they move, or they gain and remove access to AWS immediately, rather than us worrying about access keys and all that kind of craziness.
Rakesh asks, how does it compare with enterprise tools like CyberArk, which also has a cloud offering?
It's a great question. I haven't personally used CyberArk, so I would love for somebody else to tell me how it compares. I know that CyberArk was initially pushed on a couple of clients that I've worked with, and I got some sort of outside consulting advice from a different organization and said, does CyberArk really work well in the cloud in terms of, especially their other offerings in terms of security, vulnerability scanning and stuff? And the answer was no, not really. Their offering isn't great. We prefer to use things like AWS Inspector, which runs on all of our machines and gives us our vulnerability scans and reports, etc., things like that. But I would love to know how it compares. I'm not sure.
Now, you've spent some time telling us how these things can be done well and what best practice can look like. But you must have a car crash story. What are the circumstances where you've seen this go wrong in a big way?
Yeah, so the opening piece was around the horror stories, right? And I've seen passwords stored in Git repos, and that seems to be okay in some organizations, and you have just no idea where secrets are being stored at that point. You've got root access credentials to databases that are the default way for everybody to access that database, and it's almost like, there's PII in that database, right? Do you want to maybe think about maybe limiting that a bit more and rotating that password and just setting fire to that Git repo so you never have to look at the history again? But yeah, what my favorite by far, in just terms of like what were you thinking, was the we're talking about that root token for Vault that gives you basically admin God credentials across the whole thing. Just stood in a wiki, page. It's just like, I'm not sure who thought that was a good idea. Given you've got a password manager in the organization, why did you put it in a wiki? You just put it in the password manager. And it's almost just like, people are trying to put all these cool things in place to, that are really secure and well maintained and all that kind of stuff, and then just sort of just forget the basics and just put something like, the root token in a wiki page. It's just, really frustrating to see that, those things happen.
That's a great story. Thank you for that. And does anybody else in the audience have any more questions? If you have, please put them in the questions panel right now. Otherwise, with 4 minutes to go, we have finished this presentation. And all it remains for me to do is to thank you, Jake, for a fascinating and very thought-provoking tour of this area. There's a great deal of material here for us all to take away. We'll have the recording available. We'll send it out to everybody who has attended and to those who would like to have done but couldn't make it. With that email will come the links that Jake mentioned earlier to research this area further. If you think of further questions or issues that you'd like to email in, please do so either to Jake or to 4IT, and we'll do our best to address them for you, or at least we'll pass them on to Jake. And in the meantime, do please complete the survey that will pop up on your screen when you close this session. And in an hour's time, there'll be a feedback email. We really would value your thoughts about how we can continue to make these sessions better as we keep presenting them. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. Thank you for attending. Thanks again to Jake, and thank you to Infinity Works for fielding him, and good night.